It is terrifying how easily a happy home is dismantled by a few whispered jokes, especially when they spill from someone sharing your blood. I thought burying one massive secret would protect our family honor. Instead, my silence became the sharpest weapon for the monster sitting at my dinner table. When her lies nearly burned my marriage to the ground, I realized the only way to stop the fire was to drag her completely into the glaring light. Hello and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. We are so incredibly grateful for your continued support. Sadly, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to continue operating, which means we will soon be forced to stop posting public videos here. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, true, and much longer stories with deeper details and multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot share on YouTube. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the description or the pinned comment. Now, let us begin today's story of how I, Laurel Fitzgerald, watched my own sister try to destroy my life. My husband Marcus and I had just welcomed our first son, Leo, into the world. He came exactly 1 month premature, yet miraculously. He possessed the beautifully chubby cheeks and robust health of a baby who had taken his sweet time. The doctors called him a resilient fighter, but to Marcus and me, he was nothing short of a tiny, perfect miracle. We were utterly exhausted, surviving on maybe 2 or 3 scattered hours of sleep each night, but our home was filled with an overwhelming, quiet joy, or at least, it was, until my older sister, Beatrice Vance, decided that our pristine happiness was an offensive, glaring light she desperately needed to extinguish. The poison began its slow drip at our annual Thanksgiving dinner. The entire extended family was gathered around my parents' massive mahogany dining table, passing around steaming dishes while cooing over baby Leo, who slept soundly against Marcus's chest. Beatrice sat directly across from us. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive red wine, her eyes darting between my newborn son and me with a coldly calculated gleam. "You know, Laurel," Beatrice announced, her voice pitched just loud enough to effortlessly slice through the ambient chatter of over 20 relatives. "For a baby born 4 weeks early, he certainly has the astonishing lung capacity and the sheer weight of a full-term infant. Are you absolutely certain about your math?" I froze instantly, my fork hovering uselessly over my plate. The doctors were very clear about his gestational age. Beatrice? She let out a dry, breathy laugh that held absolutely no warmth. "Oh, I am completely sure they were. It is just funny, is all. I mean, if we count backward exactly 9 full months from today, that timeline lines up perfectly with that big corporate retreat you attended. You know, the one where you traveled across the country alone with your old boss from Ethelgard Tech Solutions." The dining room fell completely, horrifyingly silent. I could practically feel the sudden, heavy shift in the barometric pressure of the room. Someone awkwardly cleared their throat, and my mother frantically attempted to change the subject by offering around the cranberry sauce. We all forced nervous, brittle laughter, silently agreeing to pretend it was just Beatrice displaying her notoriously difficult personality. But she did not stop there. That vile suggestion became her absolute favorite new weapon. At our family Christmas gathering, while everyone else brought soft knitted blankets and gentle developmental toys, Beatrice handed me a brightly wrapped, ostentatious box. I opened it to find a custom-printed baby t-shirt staring back at me. It read, "Boss's Clone," in bold, mocking black letters. "Oh, please do not look so offended, Laurel," she smirked, watching my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. "It is just a bit of sharp humor. You know I have a beautifully dark sense of humor. Do not be so incredibly sensitive." However, a vicious joke told a dozen times ceases to be a joke. It slowly morphs into a sinister suggestion. Over the next few months, the atmosphere at every family gathering mutated into something unrecognizable and suffocating. The warm, loving smiles of my aunts and cousins turned into lingering, heavily calculating stares. I would catch relatives whispering in the kitchen, their eyes darting sharply toward Leo's face, then sliding over to Marcus, desperate to uncover non-existent discrepancies in their features. The air grew thick and unbreathable, choking the innocent joy out of every holiday, every Sunday dinner, and every milestone my son reached. Outwardly, Marcus remained my fiercest, most loyal protector. Whenever Beatrice launched one of her sly, venomous comments across the room, his jaw would immediately tighten. He would loudly and defiantly declare how Leo had his exact nose shape and his grandfather's unmistakable chin. He would wrap his arm protectively around my waist, pulling me close to project an unbreakable, united front to the room. But poison does not require a gaping wound to infect the bloodstream. It merely needs a microscopic scratch. Beatrice had gleefully provided that scratch. The toxic whispers began to eat away at my husband's confidence in the isolating, quiet hours of the night. I started noticing the small, agonizing shifts in his behavior. He would casually, yet pointedly, ask highly specific questions about my old work schedule from over 1 year ago. He would stare at Leo a fraction of a second too long when he thought I was not looking. Then, one Tuesday evening, the facade cracked. I walked into our dimly lit bedroom to put away laundry and found him sitting rigidly on the edge of the mattress. My personal phone gripped tightly in his hands. The harsh glare of the screen illuminated his pale face as he frantically scrolled through my past location history and archived call logs from the exact month Leo was conceived. He dropped the phone onto the bed the second he heard my footsteps, a heartbreaking flash of pure guilt and terror in his eyes. He said absolutely nothing, but the devastating silence screamed the truth. The safe foundation of our home was silently, violently cracking beneath our feet, and my own sister was the one cheerfully swinging the sledgehammer. The illusion of our safe haven shattered completely on a bleak Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with an incoming message from my younger cousin, Emily. The text contained no greeting, only 3 hastily captured screenshots and a single, frantic sentence begging me not to reveal who sent them. I opened the first image, and my stomach violently plummeted. It was a private family group chat, conspicuously omitting my parents and me. Beatrice was the administrator. She had named the chat The Countdown. There, displayed in crisp blue and gray bubbles, was a grotesque digital betting pool. My own aunts, uncles, and cousins were wagering actual, hard cash on exactly when my husband would finally break and order a paternity test. My Aunt Susan had put down $50 on the month of June. My older cousin David wagered $100 that Marcus would do it before Leo turned 6 months old. Beatrice, orchestrating the entire sickening spectacle, had typed a message decorated with laughing emojis, boasting that she had put $200 on Marcus doing it behind my back before the end of the current week. They were treating the potential destruction of my marriage like a crude sport, finding immense entertainment in the agonizing erosion of my life. The cruelty did not remain confined to digital screens. Beatrice rapidly escalated her campaign from passive-aggressive whispers to blatant psychological warfare. 3 days later, Marcus returned home from work with a heavy, unnatural slump in his shoulders. His face was the color of old parchment. He silently walked into the kitchen, entirely bypassing Leo's high chair, and slammed a crumpled piece of glossy paper onto the granite countertop. I smoothed it out with trembling fingers. It was a brightly colored advertisement for a rapid, confidential paternity testing clinic located just 3 blocks from his office building. Marcus stared at the floor, his voice hollow as he explained that he had found it deliberately tucked under the windshield wiper of his car in his secure corporate parking lot. Beatrice was the only family member who worked in the adjacent building and had access to that specific garage. She was hunting us now, stalking the perimeter of our lives to ensure her venom was inescapable. The space between Marcus and me mutated into a sprawling, frozen wasteland. We stopped touching. We stopped making eye contact. Instead, we began to tear each other apart over breathtakingly insignificant things. A forgotten coffee mug on the coffee table escalated into a vicious, hour-long screaming match about mutual disrespect. A slightly delayed text message response triggered a cold, suffocating silence that lasted for 2 entire days. We hurled bitter accusations about who was doing more household chores, who was managing the finances poorly, and who was failing to support the other. Yet, underneath the deafening noise of every single argument, the real monster lurked in the shadows. We were not screaming about dirty laundry or unwashed dishes. We were screaming because the agonizing phantom of doubt was tightly wrapping its hands around our throats, choking the breath out of our relationship, and neither of us possessed the courage to speak its actual name. The absolute lowest point, the moment I realized the infection had spread beyond repair, arrived via a seemingly innocent phone call from my mother-in-law. Helen. Helen had always been a warm, fiercely protective woman who adored me, but that afternoon, her voice carried a strange, strained artificiality. After exchanging 5 minutes of pleasantries about the weather, she cleared her throat. She asked, attempting to sound purely medically curious, if there was a strong history of sudden premature births on my side of the family tree. She carefully suggested that perhaps she and my father-in-law should know if there were any hidden genetic markers they needed to be aware of for Leo's future health. The ground completely gave way beneath me. I gripped the edge of the kitchen sink, trying to keep my legs from collapsing. Beatrice had not just poisoned my bloodline, she had successfully reached across the aisle and injected her toxic narrative into the minds of my husband's parents. The seed of doubt was now a sprawling, choking vine, entangling everyone we loved. The breaking point finally ruptured at 3 a.m. I woke up to an empty bed. The digital clock glowed fiercely in the pitch-black room. I walked softly down the hallway and found Marcus sitting on the cold hardwood floor of the nursery. He had his knees pulled tightly to his chest, rocking slightly back and forth. The soft, golden glow of the nightlight illuminated the tears streaming freely down his exhausted face. He was staring at the crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of our son's tiny chest. When he heard me approach, he did not look away. "I love him," Marcus sobbed, his voice cracking into a million jagged pieces. "I love him more than I love my own breathing, but I cannot sleep. I have not slept a full night in 4 months. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her voice. I hear the jokes. I see the math she laid out. I hate myself for it. Laurel, I hate myself for letting her inside my head, but the noise is so loud I cannot shut it off." I sank to the floor beside him, wrapping my arms around his shaking shoulders. I did not yell. I did not defend my honor, because I realized in that agonizingly clear moment that my innocence was irrelevant to the pain tearing him apart. He was bleeding out from 1,000 invisible cuts inflicted by my own flesh and blood. I swallowed the massive, burning lump of pride and betrayal in my throat. I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes and told him exactly what we were going to do. We were going to a clinic the very next morning. We were getting the most advanced, legally binding genetic test available. I made it absolutely clear to him that we were not doing this to satisfy his fears or to validate the rumors. We were doing it to forge an indestructible weapon of pure truth. I was going to hand him the sharpest sword imaginable, and together, we were going to use it to publicly slaughter the monster who had tried to bury us alive. The grand ballroom of the country club was dripping in crystal light and overflowing with the soft, elegant hum of a live jazz quartet. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, a golden milestone celebrated with 150 of our closest friends, relatives, and business associates. The tables were draped in heavy silk, adorned with towering floral centerpieces, and the champagne flowed continuously. It was supposed to be the ultimate testament to a half-century of love and family unity. Instead, it became the perfect, glittering stage for a public execution. The evening was proceeding flawlessly until the lights gracefully dimmed for the dessert presentation. The double doors of the kitchen swung wide open, and Beatrice emerged. She was wearing a triumphant, blood-red evening gown that practically screamed for attention. She was pushing a heavy brass serving cart, and resting upon it was a massive, 3-tiered fondant cake. Beatrice had loudly and aggressively insisted on handling the dessert course, claiming it was her special, surprise gift to our parents. The crowd began to politely clap, leaning in to admire the elaborate sugarwork. But as the cart drew closer to the center of the dance floor, directly under the bright spotlight, the clapping began to falter. It sputtered unevenly into a confused murmur and then died out completely. Written in pristine, elegant dark chocolate icing across the gleaming white surface of the enormous middle tier was a message so incredibly brazen, so deeply venomous, that it took my brain a full 10 seconds to process the absolute audacity of the words. It read, "Happy anniversary. Here is to a beautiful family of 3, or perhaps 4 if we count the mystery man." A sharp collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. My mother pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Whispers immediately ignited like wildfire across the tables, hungry and speculative. Beside me, a violent, ugly sound shattered the air as Marcus shoved his heavy wooden chair backward against the marble floor. His entire body was shaking. His fists were clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles had turned completely white. His chest heaved with ragged, uneven breaths. He looked down at me, his eyes swimming in a devastating mixture of profound humiliation, utter exhaustion, and absolute rage. He did not say a single word. He simply turned his body toward the exit. He was leaving. He was surrendering to the crushing weight of the public humiliation and letting her win. My hand shot out with the speed of a striking snake. I clamped my fingers down onto his wrist with a grip like a steel vise, digging my nails into his skin just enough to anchor him to the spot. He flinched and looked back at me, silently begging me to let him escape. I refused to let go. In that chaotic, split second, the paralyzing fog of the past several months instantly evaporated from my mind. I realized with terrifying, crystal clarity that my endless patience, my quiet tears, and my desperate desire to keep the peace had not made me a noble victim. It had made me an active accomplice. I had been silently holding the very knife she was using to carve out my husband's heart. By refusing to fight back, I had implicitly validated her cruelty. No more. The time for dignified, suffocating silence was entirely over. I let go of his wrist. I pushed my chair back and stood up to my full height. I did not run. I did not cry. And I did not look away. I walked with a slow, terrifyingly measured pace straight toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom. The jazz quartet, sensing the rapidly deteriorating atmosphere, had abruptly stopped playing mid-measure. Every single pair of eyes in that massive room tracked my movement, heavy with morbid fascination. I climbed the 2 short wooden steps, walked directly to the center microphone stand, and violently ripped the microphone from its cradle. A sharp, high-pitched squeal of audio feedback pierced the room, making half the guests wince and cover their ears in pain. I did not care. I welcomed the harsh noise. It demanded their absolute attention. "Listen to me very carefully," I commanded. My voice echoed off the high, vaulted ceiling, cold, hard, and entirely devoid of mercy. My sister, Beatrice, does not have a dark sense of humor. She is not edgy. She is not observant. She is simply a desperately terrified woman who is throwing cheap, pathetic, fabricated rumors into the air to create a massive smokescreen. Beatrice immediately stopped smiling. Her smug, triumphant posture collapsed. She took a quick, unsteady step back from the cake cart, her eyes darting nervously toward our parents, who were sitting completely frozen in absolute horror at the head table. "Laurel, put the microphone down right now. You are making a scene and ruining the party," Beatrice hissed loudly, her voice trembling with the first genuine hint of panic I had ever heard from her. I ignored her completely. I reached into the oversized, structured leather tote bag that I had carried up to the stage with me. I pulled out a heavy, thick manila folder crammed to the absolute breaking point with printed documents. I raised it high in the air for exactly 3 seconds, letting the bright, glaring ballroom lights catch the edge of the paper so everyone could clearly see it. Then, I brought it slamming down onto the nearest wooden podium with a loud, violent crack that sounded like a gunshot. The heavy wine glasses on the adjacent tables violently jumped. "This," I projected my voice directly into the microphone, pointing sharply at the heavy folder. is a complete, meticulously documented financial paper trail. It contains certified bank statements, international wire transfer receipts, and offshore routing numbers. It is absolute, ironclad proof that for the past 3 years, Beatrice has been systematically operating a hidden slush fund. She has embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from the Oak Ridge Haven Foundation. Horrified gasps erupted simultaneously across the room. The Oak Ridge Haven Foundation was my parents' absolute pride and joy. It was a charitable organization they had poured their entire life savings, their sweat, and their tears into building from the ground up to help homeless youth. She has been stealing money meant for community shelters, I continued, my voice rising in volume, fueled by months of repressed fury. She stole that money to fund her luxury vacations, to buy her designer wardrobe, and to finance her pathetic, empty, superficial lifestyle. She is not a comedian. She is nothing but a cold-blooded, calculating thief. I stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the edge of the stage, locking my eyes directly onto my sister's face. I found this out exactly 6 months ago. I hired a private forensic accountant out of my own pocket because I noticed glaring discrepancies in the public tax filings. But I kept my mouth shut. I kept my mouth tightly shut for 6 grueling months because I deeply loved our parents, and I wanted to quietly protect our family honor from a catastrophic public scandal. I tried to give you a chance to fix it. I gave you mercy, Beatrice, and exactly how did you repay that mercy? You viewed my silence as a weakness. You used it as an opportunity to mentally torture my innocent husband and attempt to violently strangle my marriage in the crib so nobody would look in your direction. All the color rapidly drained from Beatrice's face, leaving her a sickly, translucent shade of ashen gray. She looked exactly like a cornered animal trapped under harsh fluorescent lights. She opened her mouth to speak, but only jagged, incoherent stammers stumbled out. "That is a lie," she finally gasped out, throwing her hands up in the air. She attempted a manic, high-pitched laugh that sounded like scraping metal against glass. "She is completely crazy. She is just making this up. She printed fake papers to distract you all from her own dirty secrets. Look at the cake. She is a liar." But her manic laughter echoed out into a dead, horrifying silence. Nobody laughed with her. Nobody even whispered. The entire banquet room stared at her with a collective expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. My mother had buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably into my father's shoulder, while my father stared at the folder on the podium as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Beatrice looked frantically around the room, desperately searching the faces of the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had so eagerly participated in her sick betting pool just a few weeks ago. She was silently begging them to back her up, to join in the joke, but they all aggressively looked away. They stared down at their gold-rimmed plates, shifting uncomfortably in their expensive suits, instantly and permanently severing their silent alliance with her. She was completely, utterly isolated in the center of the room. The extravagant masquerade was officially over, and the mask had been violently ripped away, leaving the monster fully exposed in the glaring, unforgiving light. Exactly 2 days after the catastrophic anniversary banquet, a heavily sealed, priority envelope was delivered to our front porch. Marcus and I stood completely motionless in the center of our kitchen, staring down at the thick white paper resting on the cool granite island. The morning sunlight was streaming through the windows, casting a bright, unforgiving glow over the document that held the power to either finalize our healing or confirm a nightmare. Marcus reached out with visibly shaking fingers and tore the perforated edge. He pulled out the official laboratory report, his eyes scanning past the complex medical jargon straight to the bolded conclusion at the bottom of the page. The probability of paternity was 99.9%. The heavy, suffocating weight that had been aggressively crushing my chest for months instantly evaporated. Marcus dropped the paper onto the counter and let out a broken, guttural sob that seemed to tear its way up from the very bottom of his soul. I threw my arms around his neck, and we collapsed into each other, sliding slowly down the front of the kitchen cabinets until we were sitting on the linoleum floor. We held each other fiercely, crying with a violent, overwhelming intensity. It was the pure, unadulterated release of every single unspoken terror, every bitter argument, and every sleepless night we had endured. We wept until our throats were raw, finally washing away the residual poison she had injected into our home. However, the vindication did not soften my husband into forgiveness. The trauma had hardened his resolve into a cold, terrifyingly calm fury. Instead of quietly filing the medical report away in a drawer, Marcus took the original document to a premium framing shop and had it mounted behind thick, glare-resistant glass in a heavy black frame. Then, he made high-resolution, color copies of the laboratory results. He systematically drafted a brief, ruthlessly polite typed letter and placed a copy of the DNA test into 12 separate envelopes. He mailed them via certified, trackable overnight delivery directly to the home addresses of every single relative who had participated in that vile digital betting pool. The typed note contained only 2 sentences. It read, "Here is the conclusive answer to your disgusting wager. Consider this the absolute final communication you will ever receive from our family." He effectively incinerated every bridge with a single stroke. And I felt nothing but a profound analytical satisfaction watching them burn. Meanwhile, the fallout on my parents' side was catastrophic. They were completely devastated, emotionally shattered by the public betrayal. But they were not foolish. They immediately hired an aggressive, independent forensic accounting firm from entirely outside the city to brutally tear apart the financial records of the Oak Ridge Haven Foundation. The professional auditors worked relentlessly around the clock. The reality they uncovered was far more grotesque than my preliminary investigation had suggested. Beatrice had not simply skimmed excess funds off the top. She had systematically and maliciously hollowed out the entire charitable organization from the inside. The final report proved that the actual amount of money she had embezzled was over 3 times larger than the massive sum I had originally exposed on the stage. Realizing that the walls were rapidly closing in, Beatrice launched a frantic, desperate campaign to cast herself as the ultimate victim. She spent hours on the phone, calling every surviving elderly relative, sobbing hysterically into the receiver. She spun a wildly fabricated narrative, claiming that I had maliciously weaponized my professional background in the technology sector to forge those bank statements out of pure, jealous spite. She insisted I was trying to destroy her reputation to cover up my own marital sins. Astonishingly, some of the older, deeply entrenched enablers in our family actually swallowed her pathetic lies. My great-uncle had the sheer audacity to call my personal phone, demanding in a stern voice that I publicly retract my accusations to preserve the peace. "You are aggressively tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding," he lectured me, his voice thick with condescending disappointment. "You need to be the bigger person and apologize to your sister before the authorities get involved and ruin our good name permanently." I calmly disconnected the call without uttering a single syllable and immediately blocked his number. There was absolutely no family peace left to preserve. There was only a crime scene. The ultimate crushing blow to Beatrice's desperate web of lies did not even come from me or my parents. It came from the inside. The chief accountant of the foundation, a married man who had secretly been Beatrice's lover and financial accomplice for over 2 years, watched the independent auditors circling his desk, terrified by the looming threat of spending decades in a federal penitentiary for her greed. His romantic loyalty instantly vanished, exactly 48 hours after the audit began. He bypassed the foundation's board entirely. He walked straight into the downtown police precinct, slammed the unencrypted master hard drives onto the detective's desk, and immediately requested full immunity in exchange for his complete and total confession. The moment the district attorney formally filed 52 counts of felony embezzlement and fraud against Beatrice, the pathetic remnants of her support network violently imploded. The local evening news broadcasted the damning indictment, and suddenly, my phone began vibrating with a relentless, frantic urgency. The very same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had enthusiastically placed cash wagers on the destruction of my marriage, were now flooding my inbox with desperate, groveling messages. They claimed they had been completely manipulated. They swore they had only played along with the betting pool to keep the peace, and asked if we could all just sit down and heal as a family. I did not block them immediately. Instead, I answered a direct call from my Aunt Susan. "Laurel, sweetheart, you have to understand. We never truly believed her." She wept into the receiver, her voice dripping with artificial, panicked remorse. I stopped her right there. "Do not call me sweetheart," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. "Your silence was not neutral. Susan, your willingness to treat my husband's agonizing pain and my son's legitimacy as a cheap casino game nearly pushed an innocent father to the brink of a complete breakdown. You did not hold a gun to our heads, but you happily handed Beatrice the bullets. We have absolutely nothing left to discuss." I hung up and permanently severed the connection. Cutting out the rot was only the first step. Repairing the catastrophic structural damage to our home was a grueling, profoundly heavy process. Marcus and I immediately enrolled in intensive, twice-weekly marriage counseling sessions. The therapist's office became a quiet, heavy sanctuary where the real bleeding happened. Marcus had to sit on a stiff leather couch and forcefully confront the deep, suffocating shame of allowing a malicious outsider to successfully hijack his reality. He wept openly, confessing his absolute disgust with himself for looking at his own beautiful son and seeing a stranger's shadow. The healing was not a magical, cinematic sweep of instant forgiveness. It was slow, agonizing, exhausting work, laying down new bricks of unconditional trust over a massive, scorched crater. While Marcus and I were fighting tooth and nail to resurrect our family, my parents were violently drowning in the ruins of theirs. The psychological collapse of my mother and father was a devastating thing to witness. They had to sit across from federal investigators in sterile conference rooms and actively digest the terrifying reality that the eldest daughter they had fiercely protected and pampered her entire life was, in fact, a fundamentally broken, cold-blooded predator. They had to look at glossy evidence photographs of the luxury handbags, diamond watches, and designer shoes Beatrice had purchased using the exact funds intended to keep freezing teenagers off the winter streets. The sheer gravity of her depravity, the realization that they had nurtured a monster, aged them a decade in a matter of weeks. Beatrice, however, did not intend to stick around to face the catastrophic wreckage she had orchestrated. Exactly 4 days after the accountant turned over the unencrypted drives to the police, a judge signed a high-risk warrant for her immediate arrest. But when the authorities forcefully kicked in the front door of her sprawling suburban home, they found the house completely abandoned. Panic surged through the investigative team, but it was incredibly short-lived. Later that exact same evening, Beatrice was physically tackled and pinned to the polished tile floor of the International Departure Terminal at the city airport. She was wearing an oversized beige trench coat, a thick dark wig, and large sunglasses. When the federal marshals aggressively snapped the heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists, they searched her designer purse. Inside, they found a meticulously forged foreign passport alongside a single, one-way, first-class ticket to a non-extradition country in South America. The ultimate coward had tried to abandon her entire life, including her own children, to save her own skin. That appalling discovery was the absolute final nail in her coffin. Her husband, who had spent the previous week desperately trying to rationalize her erratic behavior to their friends, finally snapped awake. The agonizing realization that his wife was fully prepared to abandon him and their 2 young children to face the aggressive media circus alone completely destroyed whatever lingering affection he harbored. The very next morning, while Beatrice was sitting alone in a freezing and concrete holding cell, wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, a guard handed her a thick stack of legal documents through the iron bars. Her husband had filed an emergency petition for an expedited divorce. Furthermore, leveraging her newly established federal flight risk status and the undeniable proof of her intended abandonment, he was immediately granted full, exclusive physical and legal custody of their children. The heavy steel door of the holding cell slammed shut, echoing loudly down the desolate, gray corridor. Beatrice Vance, the woman who had spent her entire life expertly manipulating every single person around her to maintain an illusion of absolute superiority, was finally left completely and utterly alone in the dark. The atmosphere inside the heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom was thick, sterile, and suffocatingly tense. The trial of Beatrice Vance stretched out over 2 agonizingly long weeks, transforming our family's private nightmare into a brutally public spectacle. Beatrice sat at the defense table with her spine rigidly straight, wearing a conservative navy suit, desperately attempting to project an aura of misunderstood innocence. Her high-priced defense attorney fought like a cornered dog. He aggressively tried to shift the narrative, attempting to smear my character on the public record. He heavily implied that I was a vindictive, unstable sister who had orchestrated a massive misunderstanding simply because I was insecure about my own marriage. But his pathetic theatrical attempts crumbled into absolute dust the second the chief accountant took the witness stand. The mountain of independent audit reports, combined with the accountant's meticulously detailed, sworn testimony regarding their offshore accounts and secret wire transfers, formed an impenetrable fortress of undeniable guilt. However, it was during the accountant's second day on the stand that the final, most devastating piece of the puzzle violently snapped into place. The prosecutor asked him to clarify the exact timeline of when Beatrice began accelerating her embezzlement. The accountant took a trembling breath and revealed a truth so utterly grotesque it made the entire courtroom gasp. He confessed that stealing the charity money was only one half of her master plan. The real target had always been the Fitzgerald Family Trust. My grandparents had established a massive, multi-million-dollar generational trust fund, but it contained a strict, legally binding morality clause. The legal document explicitly stipulated that any heir who brought severe public moral disgrace to the family name, specifically highlighting actions like adultery or abandoning a family unit, could be completely disinherited by the Board of Trustees. Beatrice had not planted those vicious rumors about Marcus and my former boss simply out of cruel jealousy. She had meticulously fabricated the entire narrative of my supposed infidelity to trigger that exact morality clause. She fully intended to systematically destroy my marriage, publicly brand me as an adulteress, have my name legally violently struck from the family will, and absorb my entire financial share of the inheritance for herself. She was willing to mentally slaughter my husband and bastardize my infant son purely to double her own wealth. When the judge finally handed down the sentence, the silence in the room was absolute. Beatrice was convicted on all 52 counts. She was sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of early parole, and she was legally ordered to pay full and complete financial restitution to the charity. As the heavy steel cuffs were locked around her wrists by the court bailiff, she did not break down. She did not cry. She did not offer a single word of apology to my devastated parents sitting in the front row. Instead, right before they led her through the side door, she stopped, slowly turned her head, and locked her eyes directly onto mine. The look she violently hurled across the room was devoid of any human remorse. It was just a dark, bottomless pit of pure, unadulterated hatred. I did not flinch. I simply stared back until the heavy wooden door shut behind her, officially locking the monster away. That evening, the crushing, invisible weight that had been pressing down on our home for an entire year finally lifted. When I walked into our bedroom, the air felt incredibly light and clean. Resting squarely in the center of my pillow was a long, folded piece of thick stationery. It was a handwritten letter from Marcus. In it, he did not just apologize again for the darkness we had endured. He poured his entire soul onto the paper. He wrote that watching me stand up and fearlessly slaughter the dragons that were circling our family had permanently changed him. He swore, with every ounce of his being, that he would spend the absolute rest of his breathing days standing exactly in front of me, acting as an unbreakable shield to catch any and every arrow ever aimed in my direction. The healing process for my parents was much slower, marked by a quiet, profound grief for the daughter they realized they never truly knew. However, they channeled their deep sorrow into immediate, restorative action, recognizing that they no longer possessed the emotional strength to manage the foundation. They officially stepped down from the board and transferred complete executive control of the Oak Ridge Haven Foundation over to me. I accepted the responsibility with a fierce determination. I implemented strict, transparent financial protocols and completely rebuilt the charity from the ground up. Slowly but surely, we began to wash away the heavy stain Beatrice had left behind, ushering in a bright, clean, and honorable new era for the organization and our family legacy. The true resolution of our story did not happen in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in our own sun-drenched backyard. We were celebrating Leo's first birthday. The bright afternoon air was filled with the sweet smell of barbecue and the gentle, melodic sound of our closest, truest friends laughing on the patio. I stood near the edge of the grass, holding a cold glass of lemonade, and watched Marcus lift our beautifully chubby, giggling son high into the bright blue sky. The golden sunlight caught the exact matching shade of their eyes. I took a deep, unrestricted breath of the warm summer air, smiling with a profound, quiet relief. The toxic, suffocating ghost of the past had finally been buried deep in the earth, and the beautiful, undeniable truth of my family was standing right in front of me, bathed in the perfect, glowing light. Thank you so incredibly much for taking the time out of your day to listen to my story. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and want to help support our work, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that are simply too intense and detailed to be made public on YouTube. You can join our amazing community right now by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you again, and take care.